They mistook the homeless man for Jesus Christ, and the unbelievable happened at the same time. Asterisk, the cutting cold of Chicago's winter had transformed the streets into a desolate landscape, where only the most desperate dared to remain outdoors. Among them was Gabriel Santos, a 33-year-old man whose deep blue eyes and long brown hair had caught the attention of passers-by for months. But it wasn't just his appearance that intrigued people. There was something about his presence, an inexplicable serenity that emanated from him even in the most adverse circumstances. Gabriel had lost everything 2 years earlier, when a rare disease had consumed his savings in medical treatments that didn't work. His wife had left, unable to cope with the financial and emotional pressure. His house had been foreclosed, his belongings sold to pay medical debts. But throughout this entire process, Gabriel never lost his faith or his compassion for others. On the morning of December 23rd, Gabriel was sitting on the steps of the First Baptist Church downtown, a place that had become his refuge during the coldest days. He held a piece of cardboard with a simple handwritten message. "May God bless you this day." He didn't ask for money, didn't beg for food. He simply offered a blessing to whoever passed by. It was then that Margaret Thompson, a 78-year-old woman who had attended the church for decades, stopped in front of him. She had just left mourning Mass and was walking slowly down the stairs when her eyes met Gabriel's. What she saw left her breathless. "My God," Margaret whispered, her hands trembling as she knelt before Gabriel. "Lord, is it really you?" Gabriel, confused but gentle, extended his hand to help her up. "Ma'am, I'm just Gabriel. Let me help you." But Margaret was convinced she had found Jesus Christ in person. Tears ran down her face as she held Gabriel's hands, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in years. "I knew you would return," she murmured. "I knew you would be here, among the least fortunate." The commotion attracted the attention of other faithful leaving the church. First was Pastor Williams, a respected man in the community who had dedicated his life to serving the needy. When he saw Margaret kneeling before Gabriel, his heart tightened, not because he believed Gabriel was Jesus, but because he saw something deeper happening. What began as a misunderstanding was about to trigger a series of events that would change not only Gabriel's life, but transform an entire community. Because sometimes, when people are desperate for hope, for miracles, for signs that they haven't been forgotten, they find exactly what they need in the most unlikely places. The word spread through the congregation with the speed of wildfire. "Jesus is on the church steps," people whispered to each other. Within minutes, a crowd had formed around Gabriel, who remained seated, trying to understand what was happening. More elderly parishioners approached, some crying, others praying, all convinced they were witnessing the second coming. "Please," Gabriel said softly, his voice carrying that same inexplicable calm that had characterized him throughout his time on the streets. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm just a man who needs help, like all of you." But his words only strengthened their conviction. Here was humility, they thought. Here was the Christ they had read about in scriptures, walking among the poor and rejected. Mrs. Rodriguez, a devout Catholic who had struggled with illness for years, approached Gabriel and asked him to bless her rosary. Gabriel looked at Pastor Williams, seeking guidance. The pastor, a wise man who had seen many forms of faith in his 40 years of ministry, nodded slightly. He understood that sometimes people needed to believe in something greater than themselves, and if Gabriel could provide that comfort, perhaps there was divine purpose in this moment. "Of course," Gabriel said gently, taking Mrs. Rodriguez's rosary in his weathered hands. "May God watch over you and heal whatever afflicts you." As he spoke these words, something extraordinary happened. Mrs. Rodriguez felt a warmth spread through her body, and for the first time in months, the chronic pain in her joints simply vanished. The crowd watched in awe as Mrs. Rodriguez stood, up straighter, her face radiating joy and disbelief. "The pain is gone," she whispered, then louder. "The pain is gone." The crowd erupted in gasps and exclamations, and more people began pressing forward, each hoping for their own miracle. Gabriel was overwhelmed. He had always been a man of faith, but he had never experienced anything like this. As more people approached him, asking for him to pray for their sick children, their financial struggles, their broken relationships, something inexplicable began to happen. People genuinely felt better. Not all were miraculously healed, but each person who spoke with Gabriel walked away with a sense of peace and hope they hadn't felt in years. Pastor Williams watched this unfold with growing amazement. He had seen many self-proclaimed healers and false prophets in his time, but Gabriel wasn't performing for anyone. He wasn't asking for money or recognition. He simply listened to each person's pain with genuine compassion and offered words of comfort that seemed to carry unusual power. By noon, the crowd had grown to over 100 people. Local news crews had arrived, drawn by reports of a miracle happening at the First Baptist Church. Gabriel, still sitting on the cold concrete steps, was surrounded by believers, skeptics, and curious onlookers alike. The media attention brought both believers and skeptics to the church steps. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychologist who specialized in religious phenomena, arrived with a team of researchers determined to debunk what she assumed was mass hysteria. Dr. James Patterson, a local physician, came to examine the people claiming to be healed. Both expected to find elaborate hoaxes or psychological suggestion at work. "I need to examine some of these people who claim to be healed," Dr. Patterson announced to Pastor Williams. "If miracles are happening, there should be medical evidence." Mrs. Rodriguez was the first to be examined. Dr. Patterson had her medical records. She had been his patient for 3 years, suffering from severe rheumatoid arthritis that had progressively worsened. Her latest X-rays showed significant joint damage and inflammation. But when he examined her now, he found something that defied medical explanation. "The swelling is gone," he announced to his nurse, his voice filled with disbelief. "The joint deformity that was present yesterday is ... improved, significantly improved." He examined 4 more people who claimed to have been healed or helped by Gabriel. An elderly man's persistent cough had disappeared. A woman's chronic headaches were gone. A teenager's depression had lifted for the first time in months. While not all could be medically verified, the psychological improvements were undeniable. Dr. Mitchell, meanwhile, was studying Gabriel himself. She observed his interactions with people, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. What she found troubled her scientific worldview. Gabriel displayed no narcissistic tendencies, no desire for attention or control. He seemed genuinely surprised by people's reactions and uncomfortable with their adoration. "I'm not Jesus," Gabriel told Dr. Mitchell during their private conversation. "I don't know why people think I am. I'm just a man who lost everything and found that the only thing left was my faith." "But you're not denying that something unusual is happening here." Dr. Mitchell observed. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. "I've always believed that God works through people. Maybe he's working through me. Maybe through their faith. Maybe through the community that's forming here. I don't understand it, but I can't deny that something is happening." As the day wore on, the crowd continued to grow. People weren't just coming for healing. They were bringing food, blankets, and warm clothing. Local businesses began donating supplies. The church, which had been struggling financially, suddenly found itself at the center of an unprecedented outpouring of generosity. But the most remarkable thing was how the crowd was treating each other. Homeless individuals were being welcomed and fed by wealthy suburbanites. People of different races, religions, and social classes were sharing meals and stories. Enemies were reconciling, strangers were becoming friends. Pastor Williams realized that whether Gabriel was performing miracles or not, something miraculous was definitely happening. The community was being healed, one person at a time. And Gabriel, this humble homeless man who insisted he wasn't Jesus, was somehow catalyzing a transformation that went far beyond individual healing. As evening approached, the crowd showed no signs of dispersing. If anything, it had grown larger, with people arriving from neighboring cities after hearing about the miracle worker on social media. Gabriel, exhausted but still compassionate, continued to speak with each person who approached him. It was. And that something truly extraordinary happened. A news crew was interviewing Gabriel when a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. A car had crashed into a light pole just outside the church, and smoke was beginning to rise from the engine. The driver, a young mother named Lisa Chun, was trapped inside with her 4-year-old daughter. Without hesitation, Gabriel stood up and walked toward the accident. The crowd followed, many recording on their phones. The car door was jammed, and Lisa was conscious but clearly in pain. Her daughter was crying in the back seat. "I can't get out," Lisa called through the partially open window. "Please help my daughter." Gabriel knelt beside the car and reached through the window, taking Lisa's hand. "You're going to be okay," he said with complete certainty. "Both of you are going to be okay." At that moment, 3 things happened simultaneously. First, the jammed door suddenly opened, as if the mechanism had been freed. Second, a off-duty firefighter who had been in the crowd reached the scene and expertly extracted both mother and daughter from the vehicle. Third, the smoke stopped rising from the engine just as the fire department arrived. Lisa Chun, shaken but uninjured, looked at Gabriel with tears in her eyes. "I felt such peace when you took my hand," she said. "I knew everything would be all right." The crowd erupted in emotional responses. Some saw it as proof of Gabriel's divine nature. Others attributed it to coincidence and the quick thinking of the firefighter. But Dr. Patterson, who had examined Lisa at the scene, was puzzled by something else entirely. "She should have injuries," he whispered to Dr. Mitchell. "The impact, the way the car was twisted, she should have at least whiplash, possibly broken ribs, but she's completely unharmed." The daughter, little Emma Chun, ran to Gabriel and hugged his legs. "Thank you for helping us," she said simply. Gabriel lifted her up, and the crowd watched as she whispered something in his ear that made him smile for the first time all day. Later, reporters would ask Emma what she had said to Gabriel. Her answer would be replayed on news stations across the country. "I told him that my mommy said angels don't always have wings, and I think he's an angel." Pastor Williams, watching this scene unfold, felt a profound realization wash over him. Whether Gabriel was Jesus, an angel, or simply a man touched by divine grace, the result was the same. People were being healed, not just physically, but spiritually. A community was being born from the ashes of individual despair. As night fell, the crowd began to organize itself into a vigil. People brought candles, lanterns, and battery-powered lights. Local restaurants delivered free food, and volunteers emerged to help distribute it. The church opened its doors to provide restrooms and shelter for those who needed it. Gabriel, overwhelmed by the attention and the responsibility that seemed to have been placed on his shoulders, sought solitude in the church sanctuary. Pastor Williams found him there, kneeling in prayer before the altar. "I don't know what to do," Gabriel confessed. "People are calling me Jesus, expecting miracles, and I'm just a homeless man who lost everything. I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint them." Pastor Williams sat beside him on the pew. "You know, in 40 years of ministry, I've learned that God doesn't always work the way we expect. Maybe you're not Jesus, but maybe you're exactly what these people need to find Jesus in themselves. But what if I'm just a fraud? What if none of this is real? Look outside, Pastor Williams said, gesturing toward the windows where the warm glow of the vigil was visible. Look at how people are treating each other. Look at the hope in their eyes. Whether you're performing miracles or not, something miraculous is happening here. Meanwhile, outside, the most skeptical observer was having her own crisis of faith. Dr. Mitchell had spent the day documenting everything, looking for rational explanations for what she was witnessing. But as she watched the crowd, homeless individuals being welcomed into wealthy families' cars to warm up, strangers sharing their last dollars with each other, people of different faiths praying together, she began to question her assumptions. I can't explain it scientifically, she told her research assistant. But there's something happening here that goes beyond psychology or suggestion. These people are genuinely changed. The vigil continued through the night, with people taking turns to speak with Gabriel. Each conversation was different, but they all followed a similar pattern. People would approach with their problems, their pain, their desperate need for hope. Gabriel would listen, really listen, and then offer not solutions, but comfort. And somehow, that comfort was enough to help people find their own solutions. At 3 a.m., a homeless veteran named Marcus approached Gabriel. He had been living on the streets for 5 years, struggling with PTSD and addiction. "I heard you were Jesus," he said with a bitter laugh. "I figured if anyone could help me, it would be him." Gabriel looked at Marcus with deep compassion. "I'm not Jesus," he said quietly, "but I know what it's like to lose everything, to feel abandoned, to wonder if God has forgotten about you." "So what do I do?" Marcus asked. "You keep going," Gabriel replied. "You keep believing that tomorrow can be better than today. And you let people help you." As they talked, a remarkable thing happened. Other veterans in the crowd began to gravitate toward them. Soon, a spontaneous support group had formed, with men and women sharing their experiences, their struggles, and their hopes. By dawn, 3 different organizations had approached the group, offering real resources, job training, counseling, and housing assistance. As the sun rose on December 24th, the vigil had transformed into something unprecedented. What had begun as a case of mistaken identity had become a genuine movement of compassion and community healing. Gabriel, still insisting he wasn't Jesus, had somehow become the catalyst for exactly the kind of transformation that Jesus had preached about. The media coverage had brought national attention to the story. Religious leaders from different denominations arrived to assess the situation. Some declared it a hoax, others a genuine miracle. But their opinions mattered less than what was actually happening in the community. Over the next week, the spontaneous community that had formed around Gabriel began to organize itself into something permanent. The church became a hub for social services, offering everything from job placement to addiction counseling. Local businesses, inspired by the generosity they had witnessed, began hiring homeless individuals and providing training programs. Gabriel, meanwhile, had found a quiet apartment donated by a local businessman. He continued to spend his days helping others, but now he had resources and a network of support. He never claimed to be anything more than a man who had experienced God's grace in his darkest hour. Dr. Mitchell published a paper about the phenomenon, concluding that while she couldn't prove any supernatural intervention, the psychological and social transformation she had witnessed was undeniably real and profoundly positive. Dr. Patterson continued to study the medical claims, finding that while not all could be verified, the overall health of the community had improved dramatically. Margaret Thompson, the elderly woman who had first mistaken Gabriel for Jesus, became one of his closest friends and supporters. She never wavered in her belief that she had encountered something divine that day, but she also came to understand that divinity could work through ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The homeless encampment that had existed near the church was transformed into a transitional housing facility. The city, inspired by the community's example, increased funding for homeless services and mental health programs. Local schools began teaching about compassion and service, using the story of Gabriel and the Christmas Vigil as an example of how individuals could make a difference. Gabriel himself remained humble about his role in these changes. "I never claimed to be Jesus," he would tell interviewers, "but I learned that we all have the capacity to be Christ-like in our actions. We all have the power to heal, to comfort, to transform lives through love and compassion." A year later, on the anniversary of that first encounter, the church held a celebration of service and community. Gabriel was there, no longer homeless but still dedicated to helping others. The crowd that gathered was different from the desperate seekers of the year before. These were people who had found their purpose in serving others. As Gabriel stood before the crowd, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. "A wise woman once mistook me for Jesus," he said with a smile toward Margaret. "I'm not Jesus, but I learned that we're all called to be his hands and feet in this world. We're all called to see the divine in each other and to act on that recognition." The miracle wasn't that a homeless man had been mistaken for Jesus. The miracle was that a community had been transformed by the simple act of treating each other with divine love and compassion. And in that transformation, everyone involved had found exactly what they were looking for, not just healing, but hope, purpose, and the profound joy that comes from lifting others up. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that miracles happen when we see the divine potential in every person we meet, then please subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this every week, real accounts of transformation, compassion, and the extraordinary things that happen when ordinary people choose to love unconditionally. Hit that subscribe button and join a community that believes in the power of human kindness to create miracles in our world.